Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Roberta Herson, Superintendent, and welcome. We have CHA Architecture here with me. We're going to introduce them in just a second. And they're going to review some results of their feasibility study that they conducted for the school district, but a little bit of history on how we came to arrive at this point. In 2012, and I think Mr. Caverly served on the board at that time, probably the facilities committee. So back in 2012, the district, the school board, and this committee decided that we take a look at some of our aging buildings and look at some solutions for that and see if we could possibly get some state subsidized construction for a replacement of one or all. And so 3 applications were filed with the Department of Education out of that 2012 action. And I think they were filed in 2017. And in the year that the state pulled into cycle to approve and look at those applications was a year later. So in 2018, 74 applications were received and accepted by the Department of Education and rank ordered by need and immediacy of need, probably in needing either some major renovations or some replacement. And of those 74 schools or school districts that submitted, Fairfield Primary landed as #1. And we've probably seen enough about it even in our local news to know it's 100+ years old, and it serves our pre-K through, well, it includes some child care program for 3-year-olds and pre-K and kindergarten, kindergarten for the towns of Fairfield and Benton. And lower down on that list in the 37-ish rank is this school, Clinton Elementary, and then Albion is down in the 50s. So there's quite a gap between the #1 and where these other 2 schools land. And the state approved through the Board of Education to fund 3 projects. So the top 3 schools on that list. So we were #1 with Fairfield Primary, and there was a school in MSAD 54 out of Skowhegan, and there was a school in Rumford. And I believe they're all elementary schools in this case. So after we were approved for that and named that, I was notified by the commissioner that she was going to recommend and the state board approve those 3 projects. Our first job was to meet with the department, I did, and some of our board members, and talk about the next steps. And one of the first things we need to do was hire a firm to do a feasibility study, an architectural and engineering firm to do that, and kind of revisit some of the work that was done previously for the 2012 study and see where we're at. So we hired CHA through a subcommittee out of the board. There was a selection committee, and we interviewed several firms, visited a lot of the projects that each of the firms had designed and had constructed with that school unit. And we're here today to talk about a study and the results of that they reported to the school board in December in a public meeting, and gave some recommendation to the school board. And since then, our school board has formed a building committee, and we're beginning this work of just trying to solicit from the community, what the community's wishes are for education for our students here, and not just the facility, the physical plant, but the programming. And the whole process is going to be successful or not to the degree that we involve our stakeholders, and that the project reflects what the community members of 49 wish to see. So I don't mean to be talking here at you. Adam Cunningham, I always mispronounce it, from CHA, and Kathy Cogan are here tonight to talk about the study that they did, update you on the work that we've done with the forums. This is the 4th of 6 we've organized for in-person, and we're also going to have a virtual forum, so people have opportunity to participate in any way that they're able to. We have a dedicated email address on our website for questions that might arise from the community. There on our website, we also have a survey. We're recording these events and we're posting those videos up. So as much as the public can see and participate in the process as far as we've taken it, it's going to be out there, and we'll continue with that piece. So thank you for being here, and happy to.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to use this because I'm afraid you won't be able to hear me through my multi-layered mask here. So tonight, we wanted to do, as Roberta mentioned, we wanted to do a couple of things. We want to, Roberta talked a little bit about the opportunity from the state. Roberta always says that it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity that the state is willing to fund a project in your school district. Typically, we build buildings these days for about a 50-year lifespan, 50 or plus year lifespan. So, the state doesn't, that's the type of building that they build, and once they build one for 50 years, there are lots of schools in the state that need to be renovated or replaced. So this really is a once in a lifetime or once in a generation opportunity. We want to talk to you, as Roberta said, a little bit about what we learned about your existing schools, and then address some concerns and issues. Talk a little bit about the process and what the next steps actually look like. There are a lot of them, so we want to kind of address that a little bit, and make sure that we get some feedback from you all as well. So, as Alan mentioned to me the other day, and I think he said this last night too, the Department of Education and CHA, when we start one of these projects, we really want to do our homework. We want to make sure that we get into the buildings, we understand what your curriculum needs are, we understand what your existing facilities are, we understand what the goals, the education visioning is for the district. And the first step was to really understand what your existing building stock looks like for elementary and primary schools. So we wanted to look at things like the current capacity, the space allocation in the buildings, how the buildings are currently used, what programs you have in them, whether you have a gym and a cafeteria or a cafetorium in each space, that kind of thing. We wanted to look at all of your building systems, the age and lifespan left on your mechanical systems, your electrical systems. We looked a little bit on compliance with current codes and current regulations, especially accessibility. We look at expansion capacity. What does the site look like? Does it allow for the building to have additions put onto it? We look at the way that the site is used in terms of site circulation. So the bus drop-off, the parent drop-off, is it really a safe best practices? Is there opportunity for that to get improved, et cetera? So we started with Fairfield. I'm going to trip on these. And Fairfield was built in 1907. It was rebuilt in 1927 after the fire, and then it had the annex added in 1952. So it's a substantially older building. It has a lot of issues complying with ADA, so there's lots of stairs. It's a small building footprint, but it's stretched out over 13 different levels, Al?
That's actually 13 different levels.
13 different levels. So a few stairs up here, a few stairs down there, a few stairs up there. So that makes it difficult to address the ADA concerns, the accessibility concerns. It does have a sprinkler system, but it's on a very small lot. It's only on 1.5 acres of land. And as you know, if you've been there, you know that there's no space for drop-off. There's parking lot, buildings, and playground, and that pretty much maxes it all out. So the drop-off situation happens in the street, which is not ideal necessarily. And the site is completely maxed out, so addition capacity there is pretty minimal. Next, we looked at...
Well, I was going to say, Fairfield is 113 years old, since it was originally built. And you can imagine the things that have come along since that time it was originally built. ADA, mechanical systems. Fairfield has open stairs. It also has a population of pre-K, which it's not really good to have them above the level of exit discharge up on the upper floors. So, but it's a purchase a dedicated population for the whole building, so.
So then we looked at Albion. Albion was built in 1952. It had an addition put on in 1980. Similar to this building, actually, a lot of the plumbing fixtures have outlived their lifespan. They are also not compliant with current accessibility regulations. The truth is that the ADA, the accessibility requirements, they came into play, after these buildings were built. So there's newer requirements for accessibility. It has to do with, even just the types of doorknobs that are on all the doors. You see here, you've got a lot of the doorknobs have the twist turn, which is not an accessible hardware. But also lots of steps up and down into different spaces. At Albion, the systems are quite outdated, and it does not have a sprinkler system, which is okay, except that if we wanted to add to that building, if we wanted to put an addition on Albion, it would require us to put in a new sprinkler system in order to meet code. Albion struggles from the site circulation being combined there. So the bus drop-off and the parent drop-off are combined into one loop, which is congested and not necessarily the safest approach for kids. You can see in here, the original building is here, and the addition is there. And again, this site is quite small as well. Probably.
It's actually the other way around.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did it wrong. I'm sorry. Original building in red, addition in blue. My apologies. But again, this site is quite small as well. A new building from the state of Maine, their guidelines, would require a minimum of 20 acres for a school about this size. So I think this site is under 5 acres now, is that right?
6.25 acres.
No, just over. Yeah. So it's quite small.
And Albion serves on current enrollment of about 116 students.
I didn't hear you, sir.
Albion, excuse me, thank you. Albion has 116 students and it's 6.25 acres.
Benton was built in the 1950s. The original building was built in the 1950s, and then it had an addition put on in 1980. That's your newest building. With the addition came renovations, and so that's only about 30 years old. And that building has good lifespan left in it. It has systems that can be upgraded. It has as needed. It does have some accessibility things to address, but they're not necessarily as difficult to address as they are at Albion and Clinton. One of the things that we see at both Clinton and Albion is the mechanical systems there have been meticulously maintained. They've done an excellent job of keeping those systems running, but they have outlived their lifespan. And you see in classrooms, you'll see heaters mounted to the wall to keep certain rooms warm, where they just couldn't, the plant for the building just couldn't keep up with the different spaces. The other thing that we see in both of those buildings is a reduction in daylighting in the classrooms. So whereas today, with increased insulation and glazing, we can get a lot more daylight into classrooms. In both of those buildings and in Fairfield, when in the 70s when we were dealing with energy embargoes, we reduced all of the windows in order to minimize energy loss in those buildings. So there isn't as much daylight as there could be in those buildings.
Yeah, I think originally both Clinton and Albion had lots of windows going down through all the classrooms. That's the way they built them. You have storage on the outside walls, and then you have almost all windows. And then a lot of those get reduced. The amount of glazing gets reduced, which probably was the right thing, but there's a good balance between the floor plan and how much glazing you actually have in the classrooms.
Benton, actually, the additions to Benton are really quite nice. They have these little houses, these little pods of classrooms that circulate around a shared activity space, and that's a really nice design. It promotes flexibility of their spaces. It does have some challenges with it in the fact that the classrooms are all quite small. Classroom sizes are about 600 square feet at Benton, and today's standards from the Department of Education is about 800 square feet. So they're a little bit on the small side, and they also have the highest student-teacher ratio in that building too, which is challenging. So the other thing that's, although these little pods are really great in terms of functionality and creating this like a little sense of community in those little houses, they have hipped roofs, so they're very difficult to add on to. Plus the site is quite small as well, so it's challenging to try to put an addition on any of these sort of wings here. But it is organized really well, the central library and then sort of public spaces over here. Yesterday we were able to access the cafeteria space, and not have to go through the building, which is a really nice design because it keeps the public out of those classroom spaces. Clinton, this is where we see the heaters mounted to the walls. We see a few accessibility concerns where you have to step up to get into bathrooms. Plumbing fixtures have outlived their lifespan and are also not accessible. Stairs to get down to the music room, so the music room is not accessible. Some challenges there for sure. The original building was built in 1940 that's these little blue buildings here, and then addition in 1949, 59, 63, 74, and 89. So lots of additions, which means lots of little patches and expansions of the existing electrical and mechanical systems, as opposed to one sort of universal system that serves the whole building. Anything else there, Al? This is also, there's no sprinkler system here as well, so any future additions would require a sprinkler system.
Right. Like Albion, Clinton, and Fairfield to some extent, the whole idea about student safety, having a complete sprinkler coverage, which is what we provide. It's the wood frame buildings for the most part. We know Clinton has little to no insulation. There's some insulation in some of the wood frame stud walls, but it's pretty minimal. And some of the window packages. With this many additions on a building, we usually see systems workarounds and systems starting to fail. But when you got to replace it, there's like 15 different types of systems going on. And that's really hard to manage.
Site circulation is challenging here too.
Site circulation is,
so the parking up in front here, and then some of the bus drop-off systems. It's congested and it's
right.
tight.
I mean, from parking out at the front entry and having protections at the front entry, in case somebody lost control of their vehicle, they could drive right in. When they back up out of the front in the visitor area, they're backing out into a street. There's not enough visibility between the front entry and the queuing loops for parent drop-off and for the buses. And those are all kind of like key components at the Department of Education and our design of schools that we've discovered. The whole idea of having a single point of entry as a control point with a vestibule that's right there is also helpful.
So that's sort of the physical attributes of the buildings. And then we also look at the cost of ownership of the building. So we look at what your energy costs are for all of your buildings and also what your operation and maintenance costs are. So we got this information from Scott, and he helped us get all of the energy costs, annual energy costs for the buildings and maintenance costs. So right now, Albion is costing about $1.72 a square foot, Benton $1.54, Clinton $1.19, and Fairfield 80 cents. That's largely because it doesn't have any ventilation system, right? So there's no electricity used to push any air around or get fresh air into that building. It's also a smaller building. And then, we compared that just for comparison purposes. These are examples of newer buildings, and they're running quite a bit lower, Great Falls School in Gorham, that's about the same size as Benton, and the energy costs are about less than half per square foot. And then we also looked at operational costs per square foot from Scott, and we're looking at the existing buildings are costing somewhere between 2 and 3 3/3 per square foot for operational costs. And a typical new construction, we see those operational costs, the maintenance costs down around $1 a square foot, so $1.60 square foot for operational and energy uses. And that has a lot to do with lots of different things, but one of them is that newer materials don't require as much maintenance. The linoleum that you have in your schools, the stripping and waxing that you do every year, the newer materials that we put into buildings don't require that. And there's just more efficiencies in newer buildings. So that's where we see a significant reduction in operational costs there.
And so for your buildings, the carrying cost for both the utilities and the operations and maintenance is about $3.50 a square foot.
Yeah.
If you were to take all your schools outside of the middle school and high school, an average cost $3.50. Compared to a new building that the Department of Education will support, that meets code, the energy codes and everything else, the operational cost $2 a square foot or less. So that's one of the benefits of doing a new facility.
So the other thing that we looked at for cost of ownership is imminent essential repairs that would need to be done to the buildings. And we didn't look at Fairfield because Fairfield, we collectively as architects in the Department of Education don't see a lot of value in putting a lot of money into that building. It's because of the number of floors in the building, it is not appropriate for continued use as an educational facility. So, but we did look at Albion and Clinton, and over the course of the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, there are going to be significant costs to maintain those buildings and replace systems. So replacing electrical systems, mechanical systems, boilers, roofs, et cetera, and adding sprinklers to the building. And we worked with our cost estimator and estimated that for Albion, we'd be looking at $3 to $4 million in essential repairs over the next 10 years. And also for Clinton, between $4 and $4.5 million in essential repairs. Those do not include things like ADA upgrades. They don't include things like improvement to the envelope to make it more energy efficient, or the roofs. It doesn't include anything like replacing finishes or replacing anything in the class of technology in the classrooms or anything like that. It's just essential building maintenance, essential systems repairs.
So with all these buildings, when we took a look at them and reviewed all the previous reports, when they were designed, requirements per person was like 5 CFM, cubic feet per minute for ventilation. Then it changed to 15. And now with the pandemic, we're all looking at what's next, how much ventilation and where. So things have really changed since these buildings were originally designed. But none of these, Clinton and Albion and Fairfield just don't have mechanical ventilation and filtration to speak of.
And as Roberta pointed out last night, with the COVID concerns at Benton, you can apply for funds to upgrade the existing systems and improve the ventilation in that building. But in Clinton and Albion and Fairfield, there's no system to improve. There's no ventilation system for those buildings at all. So there's no fresh air system for those buildings. So we also look at the educational suitability of the buildings. We've determined, as I mentioned before, that Fairfield is not suitable for continued use for education, largely because of the multiple floors. And Albion and Clinton, they're great schools, they're great community schools. But one of the challenges that we know is that we see in all of our older schools in the state is that they weren't designed at a time when special ed programs were really important and really necessary. So we know that these spaces, these schools, they don't have those spaces dedicated for special education, and that's a big part of what we look at when we evaluate the suitability of a building, of an education facility. So after we did this assessment, and we looked largely at the physical nature of the building and the age of the facilities and the age of the components in the building, and we looked at the cost of ownership, we recommended to the school board that Albion and Clinton not be continued to be used for education purposes without significant upgrades, without these significant upgrades to the buildings. And those, after conversations with the Department of Education, those would be costs borne by the local taxpayer. That's not something that the state would fund. They would not fund these kinds of mechanical, electrical, and sprinkler updates to those two buildings as part of this project. So the last thing that the state wants us to do at this phase is they want you to look at updated enrollment projections. So they look at the 10-year enrollment projection, and you had the school district had their enrollment projections updated for pre-K to 6. And it's looking like the projection for 10 years out is not that different, really. It's about a reduction of about 100 students, which across pre-K 6 isn't really that unexpected. We're seeing a trend in the state where enrollment projections largely in the state are going down. So I'll pause. We have more information to present tonight, but I'll pause for any questions, if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so this was the first part that we were tasked to do with the Department of Education, is to review all the facilities, review all the previous work that was done and studies, to do site visitations, and then make a recommendation based on what we were seeing for the systems and essential repairs that were needed. So that's what this represents. And as Kathy said, it really, our recommendation was that these buildings are really at the end of their life, and major systems are going to have to start to be replaced as we look at the next 10 years.
Yes?
Who actually owns the school?
I believe the school district owns the school.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah. The district itself owns the building and the property.
Yes,
Yes.
and there's a process for, and then probably I'm jumping ahead to your thought, but when there's a closure, there's a process for disposition, and what happens to buildings might be a question, and oftentimes communities take those buildings for other purposes. I know that has occurred in some places.
Like Fairfield, the town of Fairfield,
Yes.
the Fairfield Primary
Yes.
School building.
Yes. Formerly the high school.
That's right, that's right. Okay, so as Roberta mentioned, we are doing the next step after we looked at the analysis of the existing buildings is to do some community outreach. So we want to make sure that the community has this information that we have assembled, and they have the recommendation that we've made to the school board. And it's also an opportunity, these forums are also an opportunity to get feedback back from the community and make sure that we understand what the concerns are, what the fears are, what the opportunities are that's seen in the district. And all of that information gathering that we're trying to do right now with these forums, it shapes the project, right? So the next step after this is to really look at what the Department of Education calls the education specifications. And that's basically the education vision for the district. What does the district want to deliver in terms of education? What are the priorities? Education equity, pre-K, universal pre-K, what are those kinds of things that are really important to the district for a long-term plan for education in this district for pre-K 6? So, but these conversations that we're having with the community help to inform the team that's going to write those education specifications. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do right now. We also have, so we had 2 forums last month, and we got some really great feedback from those. Things like, the neighborhood schools are really important to their communities, and they want to maintain a sense of community from those smaller schools. Some people were concerned about the educational equity across the districts. They like the small schools, but they're concerned that the students are not getting the same type of education across the different elementary schools. We heard that the small classroom sizes at Benton are very challenging. Even pre-COVID, they were challenging. They're even more challenging now for spacing reasons. Some people were talking about how they liked the idea that a new facility would really look at the health and safety for the students and really prioritize their needs and the staff's needs. And then we also had we have an online survey going right now that's open. It's on the district's website, and we've gotten some good feedback from that as well. Things like, it's a chance to start fresh and create a new building. It's an opportunity to reimagine delivery instruction within the school setting. Safety and keeping in mind the needs of staff and children is really important. Creating an energy efficient building with best practices and approaches for fostering strong sense of school community. Clean, safe, state-of-the-art building. And then, the things that people like most about the schools now, part of a small community, small size, sense of community, we hear that over and over and over again. That's really important. That's the kind of thing that really shapes how the ed specifications get written. And then once the ed specifications are written, that informs how a building or how a project is designed. So these steps, this feedback, and these comments that we're getting from the communities are really integral to the process.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what we're trying to do is, in our experience, is really lay down a transparent process where everybody can get access to information and really be part of it. So that's why we're having so many forums. We're meeting locally. We're going to do a virtual. We've already had a number of forums, but the more that we can engage folks and get feedback throughout the process is going to make for a better project. Whatever the project is, and we aren't there yet. So it's important for everybody to sort of step up. We don't want to find ourselves getting to referendum and somebody in your community saying, I never knew the project was happening. I didn't know anything about it. So we're going to try and take everything that we've done, and we're going to post it on your website so folks that couldn't make a meeting can dial in. Once there's a project, they can see the meeting notes, they can see the drawings, they can see the progress, and see what's up, what's coming up, what's the next thing that we're going to be focusing on.
So I promised I would talk a little bit about the process. So this is the 21-step process that the Department of Education puts out for how you make a project, a school project with them. And I've said this before, it is a tried and true process. It's a well-worn path. The Department of Education uses this process for all of their projects. It has very clear steps laid out, and all of those steps involve lots of stakeholders. So all of these little bubbles down here represent different stakeholders that need to participate in each step along the way, including staff and the Department of Education and students and community, et cetera, et cetera. So right now we're kind of between step 4 and 5, and this blue line over here at step 13 indicates referendum. So we've got a long way to go with all these different things that we need to work through with the Department of Education and the school district and the community before we can get to referendum. We don't start designing a building until in here. So we've still a long way to even designing a building. And each one of these big orange lines here represents a point where there's a public meeting and a straw vote on that step. So the community has to we need the community to continually engage and approve the work that we've done each step of the way. So there's no, like Al was saying, the transparent process is built into the step-by-step system that the Department of Education has designed. So this one, for example, this first one that we work through with the community and with the district is site selection. And after we determine what the project is, and we determine what the education aspirations of the community are, then we start talking about where is the project. And where is the project it is a data-driven process. It is not someone throwing a dart at a map. It's not a political decision. It is driven largely by very specific data about available sites in the district and the location in the district and the busing times of the students and the available utilities and other amenities that are important to the Department of Education, like size of the site and utility access, and also driven by the communities. So we just went through this process, well, I say just, but it was about 5 years ago. We went through this process with RSU 39 in Caribou, and they were building a pre-K-8 school, and they had identified 6 different sites in and around their community as potential sites that were large enough to accommodate a pre-K-8 school. And then they created a list of criteria that were important to them and important to the Department of Education. So they included things like geographic location. They wanted something that was within a designated growth and comprehensive plan area. They wanted proximity to established residential neighborhoods, so they didn't want it out in the middle of nowhere near an industrial park. They wanted it within a neighborhood. They wanted to make sure that there was a reasonable land usage or usable land percentage, which is something else that the state will require as well. Potential for expansion on the site, so they wanted to make sure that the site was set up so that the building could be added onto in the future if it needed to be. 3-phase power access, public sewer and water, but they also wanted things like sidewalks and potential for outdoor learning environment, etc. So they created a list of things that were important and a scoring guide, and then they went through and they scored each of their 6 sites. So they had this list, and they gave a score to each one of their criteria and scored each site. Once they had the top 3 contenders, we went through and discussed with their building committee the pros and cons of each of those 3 sites. So, whether it was how much demolition was required. For example, the Teague Park site required demolition of 3 buildings. The Hilltop site required demolition of just 1 building. No demolition required on the high school site. Proximity to other programs in their community, proximity to recreation facilities, etc. So those things were all listed as pros and cons on the 3 sites. And then we went through, and on each of the 3 sites, we do what we call a test fit, where we look to see what would a building look like on this site, and what would site circulation look like, and would it fit, and would it work, and what is the roadway access, and what are the limitations of the site? Like on this one, there was a trail back here and a brook, so we had setbacks we had to work within for that. So we did 3 different test fits for their 3 top contenders, and they ultimately decided on a site that was downtown for them because they had a significant amount of existing infrastructure for getting kids to and from that site. It had existing recreation programs and recreation sites there that they could continue to use, and it made sense to them. They had their sidewalks that they wanted, they had good access from the surrounding community, etc. So that's the type of process that we'll go through when we do a site selection for this community as well. We look at things like the roadway infrastructure and how long kids will be on buses, and we look at like I said, utilities, existing utilities, and parcel size. But then we also hone in on things that are important to the community, which we haven't identified yet, but that's what we're working through, is what those important things are.
Yeah, I was the lead architect on Care Board, and you know, what it really came down to for them was having a school that was in their community and really related to other facilities like recreation and wellness center. So it really serves, you know, our schools serve the community as well as they do the students, and they serve everybody. So they really felt there was a stronger connection there. We were asked the question last night about what size site are we going to look for? How big does it need to be? And the Department of Education, their standard is 20 acres, and then another acre for every 100 students. So you're already starting off with a site that's bigger than I think any of your sites. I think Benton has got the biggest site at 15 acres. But we would be, you know, if we're doing a project, we'd be looking for 26 acres, something like that. And then again, it's how much of that property is actually usable. So that becomes part of the project.
So one of the things that we know is an important question for this community, this school district, is what is the project? Is the project just a replacement of Fairfield Primary Kindergarten School for 120 students? Or is it something bigger? Is it a new pre-K 6 building? Does it work in combination with Benton maybe, so that Benton maybe gets reloaded, and we look at maximizing the use of Benton and its appropriateness in terms of its classroom sizes, et cetera. And that's the question that we need to hear back from you, the community, on. How do you feel about, what are your thoughts about a replacement building for Fairfield and Clinton and Albion? We're starting to hear a little bit of that. We heard a little bit about it last night from Benton. And that's what we're hoping to hear from others in these community forums as well.
So we're gonna open it up to more questions,
Comments,
feedback. This is going to be a continuing conversation and dialogue. So whatever questions or comments that we have tonight, there's going to be plenty more opportunities. There's going to be a virtual forum next week as well. So if folks didn't make it to one of these sessions in place here, they can do the virtual one as well.
I think that one of the slides I had at the end of last.
Yes, is the land a separate part of the project as far as being, it's not part of the state money, is it?
It is.
Yes, it is.
It is?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
If purchase of land will be funded by the state.
I'm glad you asked that question. We were asked that question last night. What does a project from the Department of Education include? It includes everything. It includes the price of property, getting the property, furnishings, technology. It's a complete operational facility. It has all bells and whistles. So what we're working on right now is we're trying to help you bring this vision forth, and so that we can start to work towards a successful referendum. I think just understanding your buildings and looking at the systems, you got a tremendous opportunity here. And I think the Department of Education is really, they look at all of these projects and they like to see projects that have community support. And they feel much more confident about getting behind that process when it is transparent, there is feedback, and there is community support. And like Kathy said, when we have these straw votes, concept design, site selection, recommendation from the building committee to the school board, all these things, it gives us some kind of indication of the momentum that a project has. And those projects will likely go faster, okay, than other projects that need to take more time. But we need to do our homework and we want to do it right, so.
And the whole hand of the Department of Education in this is, it's a partnership among us. And yes, the primary school in Fairfield is one of the three that the state said they'd fund, but I've had many meetings with Scott Brown, who's the director of this program, and his team. And, you know, they're looking, the state is looking to help us find a solution that works for us district-wide. You know, the feasibility study that the DOE requires at the beginning of this process included directing the firm to go and look at our capacity in all our existing buildings. Benton is the only elementary school not part of an application for replacement. But that team required that, and that team actually came and visited and walked through this campus in Benton, and actually they looked at even, you know, the junior high and that part of the complex in Fairfield. They're looking to see what we have and what we can work with and what our needs are. One of the things I wanted to point out is, so there's an enrollment study, a projected enrollment study about a decade out ahead of the project. And we had some enrollments there, and we have pre-K listed, but pre-K in this school district is not universal pre-K. It is a partnership. We contract with an agency with title money, and there are a fixed number of slots. I think there's one section in this site for pre-K available to families, you know, maybe max 16, because there's a capacity. But, you know, we have a couple sections of kindergarten. So, you know, if the district is determined and committed to universal pre-K, there would be no limitation. It would be just like kindergarten. You know, all that families send to us is will accommodate all of them and have as many sections as we need. So that's one thing that's distinctly different from what we're doing right now, and that will require some special space. It's astounding to me to go into the schools and see, you know, little ones that, you know, even 3-year-olds in that primary building, and think of them in spaces where potentially there would be 6th graders in the building, like here. And what was really eye-opening to me, and Neil participated in some of these visits, is what is being built now to accommodate children of all age ranges and needs and physical sizes even, and the efforts made to dedicate space, real estate in the building to program needs for little ones versus older ones. We talked about the Benton classrooms. So when those were constructed, there was a lower ratio probably of what was expected for student-to-teacher ratio, but you know, 6th grade bodies in those classrooms, it's crowded. You know, pre-COVID, before we were doing the hybrid, you know, that wasn't much space for sections of 20 plus students. So we think, you know, globally, you know, what those needs are. We have other kinds of programs in schools than what these were built for. And you know, special education programming is among one of the services we provide. And again, I mentioned the pre-K, and the learning environments, or a separate eating space. Children eat in here, but it's the gymnasium. And that's not necessarily the case. There are spaces dedicated to those particular uses. When lunch is in the gym, you know, gym class isn't happening, physical education isn't happening because the space is used for something else. Bathrooms, single-use bathrooms in new buildings versus the stalls that we see, you know, around our district right now. That takes a lot of space to dedicate for enough of the capacity to serve a population of 3, 4, you know, 500, 600. We have 600 plus students at the Benton School. So, and in this COVID environment, and I'm just adding the things that I've observed just even most immediately, we are fortunate to have the opportunity through the federal money and the ESSER to upgrade some of our mechanical ventilation systems. But we're looking at the Lawrence complex in Benton, and there is nothing to retrofit in these buildings here. There is no capacity. So we're looking at, in the intervening time, and it may be a few years, we're going to the mass, whatever this is going to bring us, we're going to have to bring in portable ventilation and then put them in all the classrooms, just to meet that need. It's astounding. You gave a statistic about the air turnover. In new schools, that happens in a 24-hour period. Children go home, staff go home, and the place is not just sanitized and clean, but the air is changed over. And you know, how important is that? Despite or aside from a pandemic going on, that goes away, but fresh air and this quality of a healthy environment. And I'm not saying it's just, it wasn't built for, you know, what there's capacity for right now. So very exciting, but also the state hasn't defined for us what the project's going to be or how big it is. They have not dedicated a fixed amount of money to that, meaning you'll max out and do what you want with this. They have repeatedly said, we will meet your needs, and we're going to define that. So.
Yeah. And I'm glad you started to mention or talk about the program, because with the new facility, there's so many things that are happening out there right now in terms of education that have changed, that the Department of Education has really come on board and started to support, like maker spaces, like project spaces, hands-on work, robotics, you know, they're just, you know, the library has gone to the Learning Commons to support other student services, the use of technology, developing projects, and now we're seeing some of these other components coming into the programs, which is really nice. So it's a way to revision what the school represents and how does that meet your educational mission, and what are the community aspirations for their use. Because we know our public schools are used for voting, used for you know, school board meetings, town council meetings, all kinds of things. So.
Well, the other part, and if I just could mention this too, about the operational costs of buildings, and we learned a hard lesson most recently with what occurred in the junior high building, where we had a prolonged closure because we had a sewer line failure. That in that the buildings are aging, and that was something that was unplanned, very expensive, several hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of a repair that we didn't know was going to be needed. And there's the maintenance, the usual, but then there's the, you know, a catastrophic thing happening to a system, or just degrading and the life expectancy and needing to invest in replace. So it is something related to multiple buildings, and the cost of ownership can be more than you budgeted for, I guess, very simply.
I think one of the other things that's really fabulous about the opportunity that the state gives you when they come in and say, would you like to do a new project, is they give you the opportunity to, it was one of the comments that we saw on the survey, to really relook at what your education is for your pre-K students. How are you doing education? Do you want more hands-on learning? Do you want more breakout spaces for small group work or resource rooms? What are the, you know, the sky's the limit when it comes to how you could deliver education. Not that anything you're doing now is wrong or bad or insufficient at all. It's just that it gives you the opportunity to reimagine and really think about what could be. And that's what the education specifications are all about. They really kind of think about and look at what other things you might want to be able to offer to your students that you aren't able to now because of your facilities, like maker spaces and learning commons that are really you know, infused with technology, or Legos. You know, we see a lot of at Caribou, actually, they have this great project room, and they've turned it into this incredibly cool Lego room where the kids go in and build things, robots and whatnot, and use this huge Lego table to do it. And I think that you know, I think that kind of opportunity for fun and really thinking about what could be for the kids, because at the end of the day, it'd be great to have a new building. It'd be great to have a building that doesn't cost as much to own. But at the end of the day, it's really about the kids and the education that you are able to give them. And that's the exciting part, that's the fun part, to think about what could be in that vein, in addition to the idea of a new, more energy efficient building.
So even though Fairfield Primary is number 1 on the list, the state is allocating a certain amount of money to the district. So
There's no fixed amount. What the state has told us is that you have other schools in your district on the list, and that potentially, if the community agrees and supports it, we can do the one replacement, or we can look at consolidating,
combining all of those three.
which would be a more expensive project for the Department of Ed, but they're very clear on, being able to serve the students. I mean, it's
I think,
state funded.
Former Superintendent Scott, when we toured that school, I think you hit it on the head, and you said the same thing separate. They're looking at 50 youth. They're willing to take care of our needs for 50 youth. And if we got to decide if that's replacing Fairfield Primary, which is number 1, or we're going to come together as a community and say, okay, we want to do one new project.
They are actually been very supportive of districts that have multiple projects and trying to solve multiple problems. It's a good opportunity for them to, if you've got 3 or 4 projects on the list of solving that, so.
And I was saying earlier, what happens if they don't have a fixed amount of money that they've dedicated to this district? What happens is we come to them with a project that the community supports. We tell them what we think that's going to cost, and they come back to us and say, you got to get it down a little, and we do. And then we agree on an amount for the project that is supported by the community, and then that's what gets approved by the state. So they haven't said, we'll give you $30 million. They say they want us to design that with you and come to them with it, and then they'll approve it. Once we work through a bunch of those steps with them, we get to a point where they agree to the cost of a project that is supported by the community.
And so under the CARES Act, the state will not supply air quality for the existing schools.
That we don't have mechanical systems in these
For them to
buildings.
put it in.
Right. There's nothing to, again, we had our, this is aside from this, it's federal money that gets channeled down to the state. So ventilation is a priority, so we do have a company that we work with that's looking at a quote for us, but there is nothing to alter here because there's no central system in place. Whereas Lawrence High, Junior High, Benton, Lawrence Couple is much older and needs major upgrades. So that's an opportunity that is, we're fortunate to be funded through that, but it's still something that we would need to do anyway. It's just the timing of this and the need to do that. But again, that's why I say these portable units is something that I'm also building into an application project in that grant, because we need some solution for a building that doesn't have a central system.
Right.
And those are just air purifiers.
Air
Is that
purifiers,
filtration
right.
program?
And we've spent money on window replacement. Some of these things are just, maintenance of buildings that we have not budgeted to. Those things are very pricey projects, hundreds of thousands, and we're able to sweep through. And if it is a project that mitigates COVID, part of it is air. We've turned over and replaced many windows in the high school. We've done some in the primary school. So we're trying to make use of the money for those improvements, but there are limitations to it.
It's interesting, when we looked at, we just talked about energy use intensity, or how much the buildings use energy. If you look at Fairfield, it looks like it's performing pretty well when you look at those numbers compared to the others. And what's deceiving about that is it doesn't include any ventilation. And when you look at the overall energy performance of the buildings and where you're spending money, ventilation, in the old days, when we first started doing mechanical ventilation, was at least 50% of every dollar you spent on energy. And now it's trending the other way. We've worked really hard for all kinds of systems to do that, to reduce that. But Fairfield doesn't include that cost. If it did, it would be much higher. So Benton looks like it's really high, but Benton has mechanical ventilation. You're going to spend more for that, but the new systems we have today are actually allow us to do a lot more flexibility within the building, as opposed to turning on one switch for the whole building. Now we can zone the building. We have CO2 monitors that detect the amount of people in the spaces, demand control ventilation, that it's able to modulate where we're sending all that ventilation. So it helps save costs.
So your step in the process now is just seeing what we have currently and doing your survey to see how much money these buildings are costing the district and what would have to be upgraded.
Yep.
To leave them as is.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then the next step is to really figure out what the project is.
Right.
Because that's a hurdle that we have to get past in order to do the next step, which is the education specifications. If we're doing education specifications for a pre-KK school, those look different from education specifications for a pre-K6 school or something else. So that's the next step, and then the next big hurdle is the site selection. So there are some big chunks we have to get our arms around, and that's why the process just to get to referendum is about 1.5 years from now. And then from there to construction start is another year. And then from there to walk in the door is another 2 years. So it's a long haul. But it's because we don't just push something through. We want to make sure that we check in with the Department of Education and with the community and with the school board every step of the way. So it's a designed process, and it's designed to be a little on the slow side for that reason. Plus, it takes that long to build a building.
Yeah, but by the time we get to putting all the information on your website and everything about the project and how much it's going to cost and the impact of taxes, we've done all the hard work, really, between now and referendum. Is where all the strategy, where the budgets are built, our understanding of taxes, our understanding of utilities, operations, where it's located, and what's called concept design. These are all ingredients of concept design. So after a successful referendum, we're off and going. We're doing our production drawings and we're getting it ready to bid. But we're not going out, it's going to be predictable. It's going to be built on that, and we're working towards that budget. We're not going to go off and do something else. So that is it. So it's a long process, but I think it's really rewarding when you see a project that's what the Department of Education is doing. I think they do some pretty solid projects. Any other questions?
Great. Thank you so much for coming out. It's really, really nice to see faces. Actually get to talk to people in person. But I know it's a challenge to do that, so I appreciate you just spending the time to come out.
So if I know this is being recorded, but just a plug. If you haven't been to one of these meetings, try to get out there, get to the virtual forum, and give us some feedback. Let us know what's on your mind and talk it up, because this is going to be a conversation that we're going to be building on, and the more folks that we can get involved, the better project it's going to be.
Thank you both. Thank you. Thank you.